HarperCollins presents Sword, D-Day Trial by Battle, by Max Hastings, read by John Hopkins and Max Hastings.
In memory of Nigel McNair Scott, 1945 to 2023, my oldest friend, who never failed to read my books, even the not-so-good ones. Introduction. Read by Max Hastings. The year 2025 marks the 80th anniversary of VE Day, end of the Second World War in Europe. This is the last of such major commemorations to be attended by a handful of survivors of the old guard who were themselves participants in the greatest conflict in human history. I've written several big books addressing the macro story of the struggle. This one is, instead, like my recent Operation Biting, a micro-study of the experience of a relatively small number of men on a single day that was almost certainly the most memorable of their lives, even if they were fortunate enough to survive long beyond it. What follows is the tale of a baptism of fire, of how 35,000 British soldiers, few of whom had ever before heard a shot fired in anger, played a critical role in D-Day, most spectacular battlefield event of the Second World War in the West, when they landed on Sword Beach and in the soon-to-be adjoining 6th Airborne Division perimeter. Rather than reprising the big picture of the 6th of June 1944, except where context is necessary, it focuses upon the impact of the novelty of extreme violence on the British sword invaders. It fills in many pieces of the jigsaw on which I embarked several books ago in exploring the countless strands of the Operation Overlord story. Participants in the previous global struggle, once they had joined the colours and completed training, were thereafter deployed in a theatre of war, for British soldiers overwhelmingly the Western Front, where they remained until incapacity, death, or the 1918 armistice imposed a closure. In World War II, the same was true for Russians and Germans. Likewise, the sufferings of occupied and victim societies in both Europe and Asia continued uninterrupted until their liberation. Churchill's people, however, enjoyed a relatively privileged experience. They were not occupied, though they sometimes thought themselves to be, by 3 million Americans whom they hosted in 1943-44. They had enough to eat, even if rations offered few taste treats. Once the Luftwaffe Blitz ended in 1941, until Hitler's V-weapons began to descend on southeast England in June 1944, they were chiefly at risk from road accidents in the blackout, which for long periods killed more civilians than did enemy action. As for the eventual 2.92 million men of the British Army, a peak attained only briefly in June 1945, while a minority served in the Mediterranean and Far East, more than half spent the 4 years between Dunkirk and D-Day training in England, unimaginably bored. Historians of the war devote most of their attention to action, which is understandable. In this book, however, before we hear the sounds and view the spectacle of the invaders' collision with Hitler's Atlantic Wall, I shall try to explain something of men's lives and thoughts during the long years of inaction before that battle was joined. They knew that the world around them was in flames, but day after day and month after month, clad in itchy serge battle dress, they themselves endured kit inspections, route marches, weapon training, leavened only by more food than was conceded to civilians, and by the occasional moderate bliss of a weekend pass out of camp. When my narrative turns to the longest day, the invasion of northwest Europe, I focus exclusively upon events at the extreme eastern end of the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?